How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good friend, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, man. I feel like the weeks are kind of starting to fly by a little bit. Had a fun time last night, played some Mario Kart with some friends.
Nice.
Always a fun time, man. Got
Yeah.
a conference that I'm going to be going down towards Temecula, which, if you don't know in California where that's at, it's kind of like on the way towards Palm Springs. So it's out in the middle of the desert in the heat, kind of between LA and Palm Springs.
Oh, cool.
So I got like a 3-4 hour drive ahead of me on Friday out into the desert, and we're gonna see if I can put together a good playlist to listen to in the car with the people I'm going with. If I might be reading a book, doing something else, not sure, but a lot of car time this weekend. I get the sense. How
Cool.
about you, Jack? How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. I'm really tired because I had to take my wife and daughter to the airport really early this morning. But we're getting through, and haven't had my first cup of coffee yet. We'll do that here in a little bit, and so hopefully that'll give me a little jolt here. But yeah, we're back. We last week we went through and did our draft grades based on what we said each team's need was before the draft, and we did the AFC East and the AFC North last week. This week we're going to be doing the AFC West and the AFC South. But before we get into it, Nick, I'm sort of spinning this on you without giving you a heads up. I think that considering some of the events of earlier this week in the NBA, it is appropriate that we talk NFL draft at a macro level, not micro level, considering this year's draft and what we're doing, though we will get into that, but at a macro level. And what happened earlier this week is the Dallas Mavericks got the number one overall pick while having according to the NBA draft odds, a 1.8% chance to land that pick. For those of you that don't know, the NBA does a draft lottery. The NFL, you go based on record, and they have tiebreakers if there's tied records, and worst team after all the tiebreakers gets the number one pick. Super Bowl champion gets the number 32 pick, and teams slot in from 2 to 31 as they follow. And after this happened, the Mavericks, got the number one overall pick, while having they tied for the 11th worst record in the NBA. They were a play-in team in the NBA. There was a lot of talk, a lot of discourse about the way that worked out, and about the way that the way that compares to other sports. And Mike Greenberg said on Get Up earlier this week, at the day after this happened, that he thinks that all sports leagues should adopt a draft lottery, including the NFL. And I thought that was really interesting, because on one hand, I'm like, no, like, it's random, it's luck, it's chance. I don't know about that. But at the same time, we had our buddy Nate, who joined our broadcast, our live stream of the draft, saying after the Saints took Kelvin Banks, like, well, hey, we'll be taken for Arch Manning next year, before the draft was even over, right? And we have these storylines, like at the end of the year, of like, oh man, if the Patriots hadn't played Joe Milton and he hadn't balled out, then the Patriots would have had the number one pick. And you have Patriots fans, right, that are upset about their team winning games at the end of the season. And when you think about that, it makes you start to think, at least made me start to think, you know what? That could be interesting, right? It could be interesting to see what a lottery model would look like in the NFL, right? Because it is a lottery, and teams have better odds than others, right? The team that had the worst record in the NBA, they have the best odds to get the number one overall pick. It just doesn't always work that way, right? And the way they do that. So I wanted to hear your take, whether you're for or against the idea of the NFL adding the lottery, and I want to hear what your defense for that would be.
So I'd be pretty strongly against the lottery system. I just feel like a lottery system, it lacks the complete transparency that I feel like the NBA is obviously facing criticism of. I'm sure you've heard the like, oh, it's rigged. Look at Dallas. They traded away a star to the Lakers and they only had a 1.8% chance to get the number one pick. And they got it. Oh, Nico Harrison must have made a backroom deal. Oh, look at this and that. And I think that a lottery just opens the door to that when there's not that in the NFL where, like, okay, do we hear whispers every couple of years of, oh, that team threw that game to try and get a higher draft pick? Sure, back in the day when the Buccaneers and the Titans were the 1 and 2 draft pick, getting Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pulled all their starters in the last week of the season and were like, oh, we're just going to pull everybody and like, oh, we just want to give our dude a shot. They're backup quarterbacks or backup players. And I think that when you see that basically once every couple of years, that like harder tanking's just not an issue in the NFL in that sort of way. And the other thing is, I think that there's this kind of separation between tanking and the last couple weeks of the season losing games and the draft. Where, say, for example, like, can you name teams that actively were, like, putting in worse players in games throughout the end of the season to try and get a better draft pick? Like, I just don't feel like I saw that. I don't feel like that's an active thing that happens when you have healthy players who are able to play. Like a Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence was never sitting on the bench just chilling because the Jaguars were trying to throw games. Like Trevor Lawrence was either injured in the last couple of years or he was healthy and he was playing and they were losing in spite of that.
Because they're bad.
Because they're bad. But NBA teams the last quarter of the season, 20 games, like they're just playing young guys. They're playing bench dudes that just like aren't as good as like a Lauri Markkanen on the Utah Jazz. Like there's a reason that they weren't playing him as much, for example, or why the Pelicans were like, we're injured, but might as well play our deep bench dudes and not risk injury when basically they're tanking. NFL teams don't really do that. And I think the overarching narrative with every NFL team every year is that basically you got a shot to overachieve in any given season. Washington last year with Jaden Daniels reached the NFC Championship as a rookie, as the number 2 overall pick. And this wasn't a trade up for the number 2 overall pick, and you're a better team than that, but you wanted the QB. They deserved the number 2 overall pick. They were bad. They weren't a good team overall, and that's the reason Jaden went to that team. And he's the one, along with others, along with coaching changes, that was able to lift that team. I think a lottery, you got the shot of like, oh, what about these terrible teams like say, for example, the Browns, like they just had a quarterback disaster situation, or like the Titans had weird close loss situations or stuff like that. Think like the 2016-17 Browns, the 1-15 and the 0-16 Browns. Those teams, imagine if they didn't get the number 1 overall pick. If they like random draft lottery odds, they're like, oh, we got the number 4 pick. We got the number 5 pick. We got the number 7 pick.
Yeah.
Like that team wouldn't have been able to turn it around to get Baker Mayfield and Myles Garrett and be able to turn around what was a bad roster, a really awful roster, all things considering. Those rosters were awful. And be able to turn that around into a playoff team by 2020. Going from 2018 having the number 1 overall pick to 2020 Baker Mayfield winning a playoff game and having the Chiefs in a tight game in the divisional round. And then you have Washington, number 2 overall pick, NFC Championship. I just feel like you don't get as much of that storyline of hope if the terrible teams don't have a guaranteed shot at getting the best players. And do I think that terrible teams should deserve to get the best players? I don't think it's about deserving, but I think it's about you want everybody to be at least competitive. You want everybody to have hope. And I think there are just so few teams that absolutely have zero hope and they know this season's going to be a disaster. The Saints, I think, they got a range where they could win, theoretically, if everything goes terribly, they could win 2 games, but they could win like 7 games.
Yeah,
They could win 8 games. I don't think they'd reach a winning record, but if everything broke right, they could get up into that higher win tier. I
sure.
think the Panthers, in a similar way, they had a terrible season one year, and then Bryce played a little bit better, and they had a range to be able to get up into being more competitive. I
Mm-hmm.
think the ability for every team to be competitive hinges on the draft and hinges on not having a lottery system. So I think that hope and that belief that every team has a shot at doing something is huge. Like, say, for example, this year, Utah or the Pelicans or the Raptors, they had no shot to do anything, and their fans basically had nothing to hope for outside of the Cooper Flag pick potential.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you a fan of those teams and feeling any sort of positives?
Sure. Yeah.
It's hard to find positives when you know your team isn't trying to be competitive and is just floating around there hoping for a good pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I honestly, I completely agree with you. Some of the other things that I think, you could make argument for, on in both sides is, in the NBA,
mhm.
one player can drastically change a team more than in the NFL. For example, right? Like we had the Mavericks this year that were, a 10th in the West. I think you add Cooper
Mhm.
Flag to that team, like even without Kyrie Irving likely next year because of his torn ACL, you still look at that Mavericks team adding Cooper Flag and you're like, yeah, I mean they're going to be competitive in the West, right? That big of a difference, because only 5 guys on the floor, right? And if one guy is, averaging it out 20% of the output, and you go from a guy that I don't know there I don't think there's pro basketball focus like there's pro football focus, but again, and using analogies, right, a guy that has a pro basketball focus grade of a 60 to a pro basketball grade of an 80, right, that's going to significantly change things like fast, right, as opposed to in the NFL. I mean, we've seen teams over and over and over again that are really bad. I think we're going to see that from the Titans this year. Really bad. They draft a quarterback, number 1 overall, and they can't, even though it's a quarterback, the most important position in all of sports, that can only do so much, right? The one thing that I would say that I think would make things interesting is if the NFL went into a lottery. I think we would see the idea of positional value, especially in the first round, change a lot in a way that I think could be really, really fun. So like say there was a lottery this year, right? Of the 10 teams, right?
Mhm.
And let's say that Jacksonville did end up with the number 1 overall pick. Well, you know what? Cam Ward isn't going number 1 overall.
Right.
Travis Hunter is, right? And then let's say the Patriots have the number 2 overall pick. Okay, Cam Ward isn't going number 2. That'll maybe it's Will Campbell, maybe it's Abdul Carter, right? And you keep doing that. Giants have the number 3 overall pick. Okay, well then maybe Cam Ward goes to the Giants. And just the way that could be really interesting. And guys that it's always been, oh well, these are quarterbacks that are going to go in the first 5 picks. Depending on who's up in the first 5 because of a lottery, they fall. That fluctuates differently. But the last case that I would say is a con of this, though some might say is a pro, is I mean, we see draft picks in the NBA get traded all the time because if we're
Mhm.
being completely honest, their draft picks don't really mean much, right? Because it's like, hey, we're giving you a first round pick. It's like, okay, you look at that like, wow, a first round pick. Well, in the case with this pick for the Mavericks, it could have been 1, it could have been 12. Like that's and so I don't like the idea of taking away the value of draft picks, especially first round draft picks. Now, the you know the adversaries of that side of it might say, well, it's interesting, right? You could have teams that are sort of, like your Steelers, for example, right? Middle of the pack team, but needs a quarterback. They could not have to trade all the way up to top 3, right? To get a guy, not have to give up as much depending on how the order falls. But I'm with you. I don't think that the NFL should adapt a lottery.
I'd lean much more towards the other. I'm sure you've heard this, like, oh, what if we had like a miniature tournament of like the bottom 4 teams play, and whoever wins out of those 4 gets the number 1 overall pick, or the 2 worst teams they play, and the winner of that gets the number 1 overall pick, like the toilet bowl type thing.
Right.
I'd almost be more partial to that than I would a lottery system. I just don't think. I think the lottery's lack of transparency and lack of easy understanding from the public, where like the NBA draft lottery, it's like, oh, if you're a top 4 team, I think it is, in the draft, it's like, okay, you have a 14% chance for the number 1 overall pick. But after that pick happens, then your odds get spread throughout everyone else, because you're not getting the first and the second and the third.
Right.
Like you get one of them, and then your odds go away for the next couple. And I just think that's too confusing for people. I think that that's too hard to digest, when, like, for you and I being NFL fans, we just get to be like, oh, that team sucked the worst. Look at their record. They get the number 1 overall pick. Right. And it's very linear, very simple. And I think simplicity is key when it comes to what is basically a huge industry. The NFL draft is a huge industry that people get into, whether it's draft nerds or whether it's commonplace fans who just go to it and are wearing their jerseys and everything and all decked out. And they're just there to be like, oh, we got the number 1 overall pick and we're going to take a quarterback. And, oh, but if we trade back, like it's just easy for the common man to digest, I feel like. And that's much better TV.
Yeah, completely agree. All right. Let's move on to draft at a micro level, meaning this last draft that we just had. So we're gonna, like I said, we're going to be talking AFC West and AFC South today, and so we're just going to get right into it with the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, we said their biggest needs were wide receiver, running back, and corner. And if you look at their first 3 picks in this draft, they went corner, running back, wide receiver. I mean, if that's not telling of what we knew and what they knew, better than whatever ESPN knew with this needs of defensive tackle and center and tight end. Though I do agree that those were things that they should have addressed as well. But their top needs, they take care of. I really like the Jahdae Barron pick for them in the first round. I think there were a lot of people that thought that might be Omarion Hampton. I really like the Jahdae Barron pick for them. Again, and we talked about this a while back. When we were in the offseason, we were talking draft stuff. The difference between, I think at the time, that I was looking at it, Kuiper's like top 10, like per position. It was like the difference between Ashton Genty and, is it Brashard Smith? Was that the name of the running back out of SMU?
Yeah.
You really like? Yeah. And I sort of said the difference between like the skill difference and what they're able to contribute to an NFL team in an offense. The difference between Ashton Genty and Brashard Smith is not as big as the difference between Will Campbell and I forget who he had as the number 10 tackle at the time, right? And so I was really cool with Denver waiting and not taking Omarion Hampton. But then on day 2, they took RJ Harvey in the second round, which I think you and I both agree is, we would have called that an overdraft. And again, because of how deep of a running back class was, I felt like this was one that was like, unless it's like, no, this is our guy, like our guy. If you don't get him, if you don't get a guy that you're like, yeah, we're kind of high on, you're able to make that up later. But still, they liked RJ Harvey, and so they take him. And then they take Pat Bryant out of Illinois, again, taking care of those top 3 needs that we had for them. So, Nick, what do you think about Denver and the way they drafted? And what letter grade are you thinking we should give them today?
So I think the Jahdae Barron pick, that pick by itself is an A. I think that you and I, the reason I find it so funny because I feel like certain breakdowns for us came to fruition so clearly, Where you and I remember with the Bills, we were like, oh, the Bills, when their number 2 corner went down, they just got picked on. Khair Lim just got picked on. Like, this is clearly a depthy, it would be really important to have a corner. Same thing with the Broncos. When Riley Moss went down, they just picked on that other corner. And we were like, oh, man, a secondary corner. You have PS2 as the corner 1, Moss as the outside corner, and then Jahdae Barron fits as the slot and the flexibility to, if Moss was injured, you could move him over there. I just think that makes their secondary, especially cornerback position, one of the strengths in the league at the corner position. I can't think of another team that has a better corner room than this. As far as the top 3 dudes, I think it's a great top 3. I really like Barron overall, his flexibility, his ability to play the nickel. I just think that the nickels become way more valuable as teams lean into 11 personnel a lot more. Teams like to throw the ball so much more than they did in the last couple of decades, where I think you're just playing 3 corners so much more of the time. And so the necessity to have depth at that position, I think, is massive. And I think Barron's just a Swiss Army knife there. RJ Harvey, you and I think, are in agreement that it was an overdraft. I don't think it was a massive overdraft, where I think my range for him will be start of the 3rd to start of the 4th. So like early 3rd to early 4th. And he went really late 2nd, 28 in the 2nd round. I think that that's an overdraft, but not by much. It might be an overdraft by 5 or 10 picks. And so I don't really have a problem with that. I don't know that Harvey offers the really high-end receiving value that I know that Sean Payton really loves at the running back position.
Agreed.
And so I don't know necessarily in this draft why you would go that early with a running back that's as pure of a runner as Harvey is if you're the Broncos. I don't have a huge issue with the pick either. I think Pat Bryant, position of need, good value in the 3rd round. I find the double edge rusher in the 3rd and 4th round to be interesting because they've been a deeper edge rush team. And so to go with 2 mid-round dudes is kind of interesting. But besides that, I just think the top 5 draft picks are all really quality dudes. You got a bunch of good athletes in there who tested pretty darn well. I think Q Robinson, I think he's a super high-end athlete who, if he can develop, and they've developed edge rushers pretty darn well in Denver the last couple of years. And I think that Sean Payton's actually had pretty good edge rush development on the Saints as well, where I feel like they draft a bunch of edge rushers and you get a Trey Hendrickson. You get I'm blanking on what the name of the linebacker is now with the Eagles, was an edge rusher there. White dude from Wisconsin. Zach Bond. Yeah, he developed as a pretty good edge rusher, but he really found his niche at linebacker. But they just got a bunch of flexible edge rushing linebackers on the Saints and as well on this Broncos team. So I think that going for depth there, I don't really have a problem with. Overall, I think I'd probably go B to B plus range for this draft. I think the Harvey slight overdraft doesn't move me that much to drop it any lower than a B, though.
Yeah. So here's something, I just looked it up. So the Broncos, they took RJ Harvey, pick 28 in round 2. Between that pick and their next pick 10 in round 3, 0 running backs were selected. Okay. Now, again, there may have been other teams that wanted to draft a running back and they wanted RJ Harvey and he was no longer there, so they went with a different position. But just in theory, in reality, no other running backs taken between pick 28 of the 2nd round, pick 10 of the 3rd round. Then there were 2 other wide receivers taken between pick 28 of the 2nd round and pick 10 of the 3rd round. Those wide receivers were Isaac Tisslaw out of Arkansas and very highly touted wide receiver, day 2 wide receiver, Kyle Williams out of Washington State.
Yep.
If I could have taken Kyle Williams out of Washington State at pick 28 of the 2nd round and still potentially gotten RJ Harvey at pick 10 of the 3rd round, I would have liked that way more than what they did getting Harvey at 28 of the 2nd round, Pat Bryant at pick 10 of the 3rd round. Now, again, it's really hard to play that game, because the dominoes fall differently depending on what teams do, right? And the thing, and especially as a Lions fan, the thing that I always think about when it comes to running backs is if RJ Harvey really, really works out, then it literally doesn't matter where they took him, right? Like, everyone was calling the Jahmyr Gibbs pick like, oh man, that's an overdraft. Why'd you take him there or whatever? Well, he's turned out to be phenomenal. I think right now he's Matthew Berry's like 1-1 for fantasy going into next year because he just produces like no other, right? And so again, if RJ Harvey really, really works out, if Peyton's able to turn him into, another Kamara, then it doesn't matter, right? And same thing, if Pat Bryant really works out and turns into a really, really great, wide receiver option for Bo Nix, then
Receiver.
yeah, then we'll say the same thing, right? So so I'm okay with giving Denver a B. I agree with you that the edge picks.
He's okay.
Yeah, I think that the edge picks, they aren't bad, but they're just a little puzzling, considering like that they have some really, really great edges already. But yeah, we can. I'm good with giving Denver a B, B plus. Right? They took care of those three needs really early, so we'll give them a B plus. Kansas City was next, and dang it, did they draft good? And we all hate it. We said for them that their needs were offensive tackle, offensive guard, and defensive line, and they didn't draft an offensive guard, but they were able to get Josh Simmons at pick 32, which is there were a lot of people, I think I'm one of them, that thought Josh Simmons without injury is the best offensive tackle in this draft. And so being able to get him at pick 32 is like insane. Also being able to like scam the Eagles out of a 5th round pick for that trade at the end of the 1st round, which again, we found out later the Eagles have been trying basically since pick 22 to trade up so that they could get Jihad Campbell. But I mean, I think everyone and their mother saw Josh Simmons is available and the Chiefs are about to pick. They're not going to take Jihad Campbell. So, but hey, Howie Roseman is the best for a reason. So we'll let him do what he does. But anyway, they get Josh Simmons. They address that offensive tackle position. They don't immediately address it, right? I feel like this is a play for specifically. This is really going to pan out 2 seasons from now because Josh Simmons has a long road of recovery, and even if he's able to come back this year, it's still going to not only get his football legs back, but get NFL football legs back without doing rookie mini camp and offseason OTAs and stuff like that. But still a great pick. I like the Omar Norman Lott pick. Get a young defensive tackle in there that can play alongside and behind Chris Jones and learn that from him. And they get your boy Brashard Smith in the 7th round, who genuinely I do think is going to be a really, really good running back. And that was a good pick for them. They do address corner with Noel Williams out of Cal. I like that pick too. I saw him at the Shrine Bowl, and he was
good there, man.
He was really good. So that's a great pick. I mean, I think I'm feeling B plus for this Chiefs team. Their draft, they did good stuff. They didn't do anything super flashy, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but still, it's I would say the Chiefs were like, yeah, you did what you were supposed to do. You passed, and you did more than just pass. You did a little above average, but it wasn't something that I was like, man, they just had banger after banger after banger and value after value after value. What do you think?
I will say I think I disagree with you here. I see banger after banger after banger, man. Like I'm a tad below, like I don't think it's an A plus, but I don't think it's a stretch to say with the value they had an A. I just think that when you're the number 31 overall pick in every round to start out, that you obviously aren't going to be able to get like the stud quarterback at the top of the draft or like a Travis Hunter. Like that's not going to be on your draft board. But I think given that they're picking insanely late in every round, essentially, this was incredible value for them most of the time. I think Josh Simmons, great value. I think Omar Norman Lott, good value. I think that Ashton Gelati, good value. I think Noel Williams, even if the value is not amazing, I think he's going to be a stud player. I think he's really good. Jalen Royals, a lot of people think very highly of. Jeffrey Bassa, people like a lot. Brashard Smith, I really love. I just don't see a pick here that I hate, and I see a lot of picks that I really like. And I didn't really see any misplays here whatsoever. I'm leaning A. I'm leaning A pretty strongly. Josh Simmons, I think, like, if you want to nitpick that, like, oh, he's not going to come in and be plug and play because of injury, that's a nitpick, I guess, but that's why it's not an A plus to me. That's why it's an A to me.
Yeah, I do have concern that they didn't address the offensive line more. You know, to be fair, I think everyone was like, oh, after watching the Super Bowl, the offensive line is the issue, and the only issue. And I'm like, that's not true. Like the Eagles offense had their way with the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So there certainly were some defensive needs. But that being said, like the offensive line was really, really rough. And so, you know, they only take one offensive lineman. They lost how many who did they lose off the offensive line in the offseason?
Tooney?
They lost. Yeah. So they upgrade an offensive tackle, which we all knew that they needed, not because they necessarily lost anybody, but because their offensive tackles just wasn't working. But then, losing Tooney and not trying to bring anybody in to take that place to replace him. So me in the middle, A minus.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with that. I think guard's just a relatively replaceable position. So I think that having a dude that you can plug in at tackle and be able to move around dudes to guard is way more feasible than trying to move around dudes to tackle. So I feel like even though I'd prefer them to have gotten a guard, as you said, not the biggest deal to me. It's something, but it's not everything.
The thing about what they did though, like at least for me, you know, and I hear you with, you know, guard is more easily replaceable. But I think as we have, in my opinion, edge rusher has become a little bit overrated, that position. I think when it comes to pass protection, offensive tackle has also equally, because again, they play right across from each other, also gotten a little bit more overrated, right? Like, I mean, we saw Brady for years. When he had pressure from the edge, he was able to step up in the pocket, avoid that, and do what he did. But it was when he had pressure right up on his grill coming from the middle that things didn't go well. And that's what we see with like almost all quarterbacks is when the pressure's up the middle, that's when it's harder for them to operate. And so I think we've undervalued and guard and overvalued offensive tackle a little bit, not too much, right? You know, like I agree with you. Offensive tackle is certainly more important than an offensive guard. But still, I do think that, you know, just grabbing somebody as undrafted free agent or signing someone off a practice squad to throw into offensive guard for that is not just going to be like, yeah, and that'll be fine. You know, you want a little bit better than that. So,
right.
All right. Yeah. Moving on to the Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, they get Ashton Genty at pick number 6. This was really interesting for the Raiders, right? Because there was talk like Jacksonville is going to take Genty at 5. We were all like, really? That would be crazy. And then they traded up to 2 and took Travis Hunter. And it was like, whoa, okay, now what's going to happen, right? And, you know, the Browns have traded back once. Are they going to trade back again? I was saying for a long time that I felt like the Patriots should have tried to trade back because I felt like they would still be able to get their guy, Will Campbell, even if they selected it like pick 10, right? But obviously, you know, they didn't. Things weren't super crazy in the top 6, and the Raiders were just able to sit there and get Ashton Genty. Obviously, Genty is the best running back in the draft. But now that we are past the, oh my gosh, look how great he is as a college player, and we're moving into the pro scene. I think all of us would agree that having a running back on your books for that much money for that long is not great. But still, they liked him. Running back was in need of theirs because their run game was absolutely atrocious, and so they take care of that. A lot of people really, really love the Jack Besh pick in the second round. I like the Jack Besh pick. I'm not as like falling over myself high on him as a lot of other people seem to be, though I do think that's a good pick. And you know, they need wide receiver, right? We said running back, wide receiver, offensive line for them. And I mean, if you look at their top 6 picks, 5 of them fill those 3 slots. You know, they took care of a couple, you know, got a couple offensive tackles. And yeah, really did their thing. Nick, how do you feel about this Raiders draft?
I don't take massive issue with it. I don't feel like I love many of the picks, but I'm cool to okay to like a couple of them.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, okay, Genty, I see the vision you're going with, where you got a stud tight end, a stud running back, and a good wide receiver in Myers. And that's kind of your plan, to be like a diversified kind of offense with why am I blanking on his name? At Gino at quarterback. Yeah. To where I think that raises the floor for this team, where this team, I think, is a team that can throw and run. And I like that they address the offensive tackle position twice. I think that they need that. Mm-hmm. It also has some notes of very Raiders draft picks, where like a Dante Thornton, like a Darian Porter, a Charles Grant, just like massive super athletes who just broke the combine. I think that the Raiders have always loved speed. They've always loved size. They've always loved freak athletes. And so there are definitely notes of that in this draft as well. Even though Jack Besh isn't a super athlete, he's still big. Mm-hmm. And so I really feel like this kind of blended the traditional Raiders philosophies with positional value and what they're looking for. I don't think there's any particular like, oh, in the first or second round, they reached on a dude and picked him 20 spots too high. And so I don't think it's that Raiders kind of traditional super reaching on a dude, very John Gruden. And so I'd probably lean maybe like a B-. I don't take real issue with the draft. I think that when you're a team that I think they might be having the number 6 overall pick this year, I think they might be maybe a little worse than that pick, to be honest, where if you look at the team, I feel like the team lacked a lot of things. I think their offensive line could have gotten better. Their defensive line in some ways could have gotten better. Their secondary, their linebackers, their offensive weapons. I feel like they were lacking in a lot of things. And so the ability to just have a bunch of volume of picks, I think, was probably their best shot there.
Yeah.
I think that Cam Miller in the 6th round is a little bit weird, taking QB there in the 6th with a dude who wasn't highly touted by anybody when quarterbacks fell. I think there were probably some better quarterbacks there available potentially.
Definitely.
Where I think Ewers maybe was available. I didn't love Ewers, but Cam Miller I have never heard of, and so I don't know.
Yeah, well, I saw Cam Miller at the Shrine Bowl, and it was not pretty. I mean, I think we had multiple picks during the game. And the other thing about the Shrine Bowl, and same thing with the Senior Bowl, though the Senior Bowl is a little bit more prestigious, is the guys that actually play in the Shrine Bowl, they still have more that they need to prove. The guys that don't play, they proved all they needed to during practice that week, right? That's why we saw Kyle McCord not play in the game, because he won all practice honors. You know, everyone really liked him. I think if it weren't for just the way that quarterbacks fell in this draft, he probably would have gone higher. Like a lot of quarterbacks that we thought, wow, all of these guys are available on day 3, you know, was surprising. So when I look at this Raiders draft, the reason that I want to give it a B instead of a B- is because they had 3 day 3 picks that I really, really like. Like, I think these guys have a lot of potential to play, to far outplay when they were taken. And that is Dante Thornton Jr., watching him at the combine, I was like, dude, like I like this guy. JJ Pegues, I
Mhm.
really, really like, and able to getting him in the 6th round, like phenomenal if you ask me. And Cody Lindenberg out of Minnesota in the 7th round, I really, really like that pick that late too. And I think where you see drafts, like where you really see the difference between teams drafting is what they do day 3, right? Like, I mean, yeah, you have teams that can have a really bad draft early on, but it's rare that you're seeing a team like just in day 1 and day 2, you're like, oh my gosh, their draft is amazing, right? And we talk about day 3 guys are the roster filling guys. These are the guys that fill out your roster. They become special team guys that can potentially play up and get some reps and stuff like that. And so I want to give the Raiders a B. Again, this is certainly nothing super flashy outside of the Genty pick. This team has a long way to go before they're going to be competitive in the AFC West, especially since they're in the AFC West. But I think they utilized the picks that they had, pretty much all of them except like Cam Miller is the only one that I'm like, nah, I don't like that pick. All the other ones I'm either like I'm neutral or oh, that was a good pick, I like it. So I say we give him a B. You cool with that?
B is fine. B is fine with me. Yeah.
Cool. All right. The Chargers.
Yes.
The Los Angeles Chargers. Which is still sad. San Diego
So
deserved.
weird, man.
Like yeah. All right. So we said for the Chargers they needed to address wide receiver and they needed to address edge. And they did that. They used a couple picks on wide receivers. They took an edge. They used a few picks on pass catchers, which I won't go crazy, but I will talk about it. Omari and Hampton in the 1st round. I think that was the right call. I think that we saw like significant running back overhaul for this roster, right? Like none of the guys that were like their top rushers last year are coming back to the team. They went and they got Najee Harris and then add Omarion Hampton. I could really see the two of them being a similar style of duo to a David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, where the way I see it, Najee Harris is the David Montgomery type, and Omarion Hampton is the Jahmyr Gibbs type. And I mean, I think Jim Harbaugh is just salivating at the idea of having that. Wide receivers, they take Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith. And they do some other things, right? They get a couple safeties, some late round safeties. They get an edge in Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina. They get a defensive tackle in Jamari Caldwell. So, as this is draft number 2 for Jim Harbaugh, I think what we're just seeing is, man, the Harbaughs, they know what they're doing in the draft room. Nick, how are you feeling about this?
So I like this draft. If I were just grading this purely off of players and how I perceive them and the value that he got for the individual picks, I think I would probably be in the B range. But the thing is, like, I feel like I almost have an implicit trust for Jim Harbaugh at this moment where, like, Pete Carroll, when he went from college football to the NFL, drafted a bunch of dudes who were awesome in the NFL because he scouted them in college and knew exactly what was up with them because he was in college and played against them and recruited them. Same thing with Jim Harbaugh the first time with the 49ers. Same thing with Jim Harbaugh last year, where he drafted a bunch of dudes and all of them could play. Every single one of his draft picks, it felt like, could play. And so I feel like Omarion Hampton, I really like. Trey Harris, I like. Jamari Caldwell, I like. Kyle Kennard, I like. But the fact that it's Jim Harbaugh and he knows these dudes and he scouted these dudes and he recruited these dudes, I think the floor is just much higher for this draft. Even if the ceiling's not, this is like going to have a bunch of Hall of Famers or Pro Bowlers, I think that he's going to have a bunch of starters, a bunch of role players, a bunch of dudes who stick around on this Chargers team and contribute for a number of years. And so I'd maybe lean more B plus, A minus probably. I think Gadsden, who you're going to get a shot to talk about, he's definitely a dude that I'd take a flyer in fantasy as a dude who's deep on the bench who could become a contributor pretty easily, I think, with this Chargers team that doesn't have a bunch of tight ends who can play. I think Kyle Kennard probably was pretty darn good value, and Jamari Caldwell was a little overdrafted. So I feel like those two balance out. I feel like Hampton, good value for the position. Trey Harris, good value for the position in the draft. And so I feel like it's just a bunch of good. But because of Jim Harbaugh, because of my trust with him and how he builds his team, I feel really strongly that this draft is going to have a bunch of dudes. And so I'd lean more B+ with this draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. Give him the little Jim Harbaugh bump. When I was thinking about, my Syracuse guys and where I wanted to see them end up, outside of, selfishly thinking about like, oh man, I'd love to have Oronde Gadsden on the Lions, but also being like, we have Sam Laporta. I actually don't think that would be the best situation for him. Genuinely, the Chargers were what I thought, right? Like their top pass catching tight end last year was Will Dissly, who, not to diss Will Dissly, has been a blocking tight end his whole career, right? And they utilized him and got a lot out of him. But I mean, Gadsden is 6'5", 236. He's got the body of a tight end, but the speed and the agility of a receiver. And the thing that we saw throughout his whole college career is he's too big for safeties to cover and he's too fast for linebackers to cover. And I think that he is just really, really quickly going to be an awesome target for Justin Herbert. There's video from the draft room when the Chargers drafted him. They traded up for him, and Harbaugh said on the phone to him, like, we have a spot for you, right? Like, which, unfortunately for a lot of the other Syracuse guys that got drafted, that wasn't really the case, right? Like Kyle McCord to the Eagles. The Eagles don't really have a spot for him. They're like, whoa, Kyle McCord's still here. Let's do it. He's a local kid, all of that. We know him well. His quarterback's coach, interviewed for our OC position here, right? So we heard about him and all that. But genuinely, I think that Oronde Gadsden of the Chargers was the best possible option for him. And I think that the Chargers are really going to use him. And it would not surprise me if 5 weeks in, he is a top waiver wire get for a lot of teams, or for a lot of guys playing fantasy. So, but all in all, I agree with you. I would give the Chargers here a B+, which rounds out the AFC West for us. And so far, they have, I think, had the best draft, at least of draft grades for us. We have Denver with a B+, Kansas City an A-, Las Vegas a B, and the Chargers with a B+. Really, really solid grades there. And so moving on to the AFC South, we have Houston first, and boy, are we going to have things to say about Houston. We said that their top needs were just offensive line. You need to prioritize offensive line. And obviously there are other positions that they need to go and get guys for too. But when we say that your top priority has to be offensive line, that means we need to see more than one pick be an offensive lineman. And it really means that we need to see them not trading out of the first round and letting Josh Simmons fall to the Chiefs when they could have taken him at pick 25. What are we doing here? I feel like all offseason, before the draft, we were like, what are the Texans doing? But you know what? They've got the draft. We'll see what happens. And then I'm like, you know what? I think I can explain and make more sense of their non-draft offseason moves than their draft. I think Ariante Ursary, I think that could be a good pick. I think a lot of people think that actually may have been a little too high, taking him in the second round. He was more like a third-round talent. But then outside of that, I understand the injury issues with some of the wide receiver room. But when I think about Tank Dell, like his injuries have been freak injuries, right? Now, maybe they know something like he's not coming back or he won't be able to come back the same way, in which case, okay. But it's not like, this is a dude that is repeatedly having hamstring issues, right? So taking two wide receivers on day two, though I like the guys that they took, those two guys out of Iowa State. I'm just like, I don't know about that. I think they spent too much, in my opinion, on the defense with how great that defense was last year. Yes, you lost some guys, but still, like, I think you really needed to prioritize that offensive line, and they didn't. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really all that I can say about it. Nick, what do you think?
Man, the Josh Simmons passing over him to trade back, I agree with you that was puzzling. I look at this draft and I don't really see. I see maybe one dude in Jalen Noel that I like and I like the value for. And besides that, I'm like, Jalen Reed in the 6th? Like, cool, but why is it that I'm praising a 6th round pick for this team that, like, you got bigger aspirations than that and you got a bunch of picks earlier than that?
Yep.
I just look at this draft. Jaden Higgins being their top pick, I'm very low on Jaden Higgins. His archetype as a wide receiver is a big, strong-handed receiver who can't separate and can't run. And I just don't value that type of receiver, especially at the top of the second, especially when in recent years it feels like you get a bunch of receivers who come out every year. You got receivers in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, even 4th round. You get quality dudes. And you invest that highly in a wide receiver when offensive lineman was there for you, man.
Mm-hmm.
Trading back for that. Ariante Ursary, I think that's fine. Jalen Noel, I think that's good. But Jalen Smith, USC's defense has been atrocious the last 2 years. Woody Marks, when the other running backs on the board, I just liked better than that. Graham Mertz, why? Why are you drafting?
Terrible pick. Terrible pick. Why are we drafting this guy to be a backup quarterback when he literally lost his job in college, right? Mm-hmm. It's an awful pick, dude. Awful pick.
I just have question marks everywhere. And this was a team where the offensive line fell apart, and that's what caused CJ Stroud to regress in his second year. Mm-hmm. It was just absolutely a team collapse in a lot of ways in the details and football team aspects. And this draft does not answer any of those questions for me, man. The receiver injury is obviously an issue. But to draft like this with these players and these picks, I just don't look at this as being a plus draft for them.
Nope.
I'd be okay giving them like a D. I'm okay. I'm like, it's not an F. There are players who I'm cool with, but man, considering the picks you had and the players you passed over and the value, I don't like it.
Yeah. And I think this, I mean, not that it's like we have to go and give a team an F. I would be surprised if we come across a team that we are more willing to give that low of a grade than this team, right? Like, because again, like you said, okay, they got dudes that we're okay with, but did not address the elephant in the room, and that was the offensive line outside of Ariante Ursary, right? And so, I mean, and let's just, again, stepping back a little bit, we're going to see guys that get picked, we're going to see guys on every draft board, for all of these teams that they picked. Like, oh, yeah, I mean, I like that dude, but it doesn't matter if that's not the need, right? Like, they take both of these wide receivers out of Iowa State. One of them's probably going to be on the practice squad, maybe not, but they're not going to be cracking the top 3 on the depth chart. Like, and so why do it? Why do it when you could literally draft offensive line your first 3 picks, and they're likely all competing for a starter, and if not, they're a backup, right? Instead of like, yeah, let me stockpile on receivers that might not be seeing any field time. So I'm good with giving them a D. The only reason that we're giving them a D and not an F is because they drafted Ariante Ursary, if you ask me. Like, And even that is like, man, we're recognizing that you're going to fail this class if we give you an F in this draft, and so we don't want to see you in this class next year, and so we're gonna we're gonna give you this D and just let you move on.
I'd also like to point out, if you look at the ESPN draft needs for this team, tight end and defensive tackle are on the needs list and are checked off. Yeah, they're checked off. They drafted them in the 7th.
Right.
That doesn't move the needle at all for
No.
what are the perceived needs outside of O-line, which were the biggest that reflected on this needs list that ESPN got from, man. It's ridiculous.
And I am not high on Luke Lachey, because if you're a tight end coming out of Iowa and you're not being talked about like a first or second round pick, it's probably telling, because all of your counterparts have gone that high. So anyway, all right, our first D. Look at that. All right, moving on to Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I say Indianapolis, I think of the old March Madness commercial with Charles Barkley and Spike Lee and Samuel L. Jackson. And the Final Four is in Indianapolis, and Charles Barkley's driving, and he goes to Annapolis, Maryland. He's like, we're here. We're in the Annapolis. Anyway, all right. So Indianapolis, we said interior offensive line, like an offensive guard. Bam, ESPN said offensive guard. What did the Colts not draft? An offensive guard. We said tight end. Bam, what do? They get Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren falls to them. That being said, you know, they take offensive tackle with Jalen Travis out of Iowa State. Maybe they're thinking he could get a, you know, when you're taking an offensive tackle on day 3, it's easier to do that and justify just immediately slotting them into to play guard. So maybe that's what they're thinking. I don't know. The Colts are just weird because I feel like everything is predicated with this Colts team on, okay, they're going to find out this year what they have in Anthony Richardson. Like, this is the last straw, right? Like we said, the best ultimatum they could have given him is, we're going to bring in Daniel Jones, and if you lose your job to him, then like that's it. You know, that's the game, right? So it's hard to even say like how good or how bad is this team, because of how basically since Andrew Luck retired, how not great quarterback play has been. I mean, they've had, you know, they've made the playoffs a couple times. Like they got a good year, a good enough year out of Phillip Rivers that one year. You know, they made the playoffs. Mm-hmm. You know, they had a couple decent years with Jacoby Brissett, but not great quarterback play, right? You know, they went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck to what, you know, so it's tough to just judge this team in general. But that being said, looking at what they did and what we sort of felt like they needed to do, I'm feeling like this is a C+. Like, I like Tyler Warren, and I think that was the only pick that they made that, if you ask me, was like, this is a need they addressed, right? I think the only thing that's makes this different than Houston is I like the guys that they got more. Like, I like getting JT Tuimoloau, you know, in the second round. I like DJ Giddens, you know, out of Kansas State, and getting him in the 5th round, right? Like, that's the only thing for me that's like makes this different than what Houston did. But and also because of what they did in the offseason before the draft. You know, with them, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, you have to take care of offensive guard or your team is screwed, right? Like we were sort of saying with Houston and the offensive line. So I'm feeling C+. Nick, what do you think?
I'm cool with C+. I think Tyler Warren, he was slotted into this Colts team, if he wasn't gone already, in every single mock draft. If he wasn't drafted by like the Bears, he was being drafted by the Colts. So Warren, I feel like, slots in perfectly as far as value. Not overdrafted him, not got insane value with him, like, oh man, he fell to us. Good.
Didn't have to give up a king's ransom to go get him either.
True, very true. And he was one of the dudes on my list where I went, okay, I could see somebody want to trade up for that dude as far as a weapon. And he's that dude as far as a weapon. JT Tuimoloau, I I like him. I think this is a bit of an overdraft. I think he's a pretty high floor dude, not a high ceiling dude. Then you drop all the way to Giddens, where I think Giddens actually was really, really, really good value for this team. And so he's the next pick that I really love. Riley Leonard, I think that's cool value. I don't know if at that point, that's right after McCord and Howard go, isn't it? So it's not like either of those dudes are on the board if I remember. Because if I remember, it was Eagles draft McCord, Steelers get Howard, and then a couple picks later, Riley Leonard goes here to the Colts.
Yeah.
So it's not like either of those dudes were available who I think would be better players than Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard also, obviously, Notre Dame gets to stay around in the Midwest, man. I feel like that's not very surprising. I don't love Riley Leonard, the player. I like him as a competitor, but he doesn't have the arm to be able to be like a potential starter. I
think
like
Riley Leonard would be like the best guy that I see out of this draft to slot into a Taysom Hill role. Because, I mean, that's Notre Dame's success with him was because of his legs and his ability to be a bruiser running with the football.
Mm-hmm.
So
he's kind of Tim Tebow-ish as well.
Yeah.
I feel like he's in that mold, maybe not as explosive of an athlete, but not as explosive, but I think he almost has like a Josh Allen kind of running style, and I think that's cool. Mm. But when I look at this draft overall, I think offensive guard obviously was a need that they didn't address. They didn't get super reachy, so I'm not throwing this in F or D. I feel like C+ I'm good with. I think that Tyler Warren, I think he's good pick, good value. But I don't know, because of the situation of the quarterback and the team, I don't know that that's the best decision, even though the value was good. Where I don't think going first round tight end is almost ever advisable in the first round, outside of like Brock Bowers, essentially. Where basically Brock Bowers was incredible for the Raiders, was picked 13 overall. But besides that, you got dudes like Kyle Pitts, who had a stud rookie year, then has fizzled off, or other dudes like who's the other the two Iowa tight ends. There was also Ebron. Ebron kind of flamed out as well. You had, what's his name? The tight end who was Iowa, who's on the Seahawks now. And then you also have Hawkinson. Hawkinson was good, but I don't know that you draft him. I think he was 7 overall in his draft. So I don't know about the value for tight end, but I'd lean C+ as well.
Cool. Jacksonville. We said offensive line, defensive interior, and wide receiver. And they surprised us for sure by going and getting Travis Hunter and moving up to make that selection, which obviously, takes care of wide receiver and DB. We'll see how much they use him. Obviously, selfishly, I really like the LaQuint Allen pick, for obvious reasons. Outside of that, offensive line, they get a guard and they get a center. Okay. But again, when you're addressing center finally at the 5th pick of the 7th round, that's more of a, you're getting a guy that is going to be a special teamer. And, maybe if you have injuries, you're sort of bulking up there, but not like, hey, we're going and getting our starter at this position. That being said, I really like the Wyatt Milam pick out of West Virginia, especially there in the 3rd round. I think that's a good value there for how good of a player he is touted to be. They don't take anybody on the defensive line, which I don't like. Like we talked about. And part of the reason, and we thought, they're going to get Mason Graham, and that's going to be awesome. But we didn't put defensive interior because we thought they were taking Mason Graham. We put it there because they couldn't stop the run. And okay, you get some linebackers, but like if you're playing for stopping the run as well, once they get through the line, we'll take care of them with our linebackers. Like it's not going to work very well. So I know it's like, oh man, they got Travis Hunter, so this is such a great draft for them. Like this is another one that I'm thinking like C+, right? Like the maybe B-, right? Like the Hunter pick. Okay, good. You got Trevor Lawrence, a weapon, and him and Brian Thomas Jr. together. That's gonna be pretty special. And yeah, Wyatt Milam, was good, good both positionally and need. But otherwise, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you see it differently, but that's how I feel about this.
The way I view this draft is obviously Travis Hunter's the transcendent, like the dude you got. And I feel like if you just look at this draft raw as far as the players, to me, the draft looks very like B-ish to me. But then you look at the trade that they made to get Travis Hunter, and I feel like even though Travis Hunter brings this draft up to a B, I feel like the trade drops it down to like a C plus. Or I'm like, okay, if you just look at the players raw, considering the value they started with, it's like, oh, this is like a B. Because it's like, oh, Travis Hunter, that's a stud. Milam, good value. Bichelle Tootin could be good. Jack Kaiser, he should be at the very least a contributor. LaQuint Allen, good value. Monheim in the 7th, solid. I feel like you got at least a lot of solid dudes, but the trade weighs it down a lot to get Hunter because they traded a bunch of capital, man. And so that's that. I don't drop it down a full letter grade, but I think C plus is where I'd lean as well.
Okay, cool. All right, and then the Tennessee Titans. We said, as you're pulling it up, we said that the Titans' needs were quarterback, edge, and wide receiver. For being honest, the Titans had a lot of needs, but according to ESPN, they addressed it literally all of them. They obviously take Cam Ward, with the first overall pick. They take Oladejo out of UCLA in the second round. I like that pick a lot. Kevin Winston Jr., safety out of Penn State. That's good. They needed a safety. Chimere Dike out of Florida. Okay. Gunnar Helm out of Texas. I wasn't very high on him, but for a 4th round pick, I don't hate it. Elik Iomanner, I love that pick, dude.
Great value.
I love that pick.
Great.
He single-handedly beat Syracuse this last year and kept them from being 10-2 and competing for the ACC championship. So, but he's really, really good. Jackson Slater, offensive guard out of Sacramento State, good, addressing the offensive line a little bit. Marcus Harris, that other corner from Cal, and the Cal corners were like sneaky, really good options this year. And then they take a running back in the 6th round with Khalil Mullings out of Michigan. Don't love that one, but otherwise, like I like this draft. I think this is a really great example of Tennessee is like, listen, we've got a lot of things we got to figure out, right? We went 3-14. We had the number 1 overall pick this year. We've got a lot of things we need to figure out. This is not going to be a 1-year process. If it is, great. But let's not plan on it. And so let's get dudes, let's address needs, let's play a season. Let's see, okay, we filled these spots. Now what are the next spots? Right. And I feel like they really, really did that and did a good job. Did a good job this year drafting. I would give them a B plus. Certainly solid passing, showed up, did what they needed to do, didn't really feel like they went super above and beyond, outside of, honestly, the only pick that I look at was like, wow, super above and beyond, Oladejo and Iomanner. The Ward pick, we just kind of all saw coming. And that combined with I think that there are quarterbacks taken in the 2024 draft that we like more than Ward. And I think there will probably be quarterbacks available next year that we may like more than Ward, though I'm not as high on this next year's quarterback class as everybody else. Everyone's talking like Drew Aller and Garrett Nussmeier are going to be the next, like Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, and I'm like, oh no, they are not. But anyway, so I'd give them a B plus.
I was leaning B. I think Iomanner brings it maybe up to a B plus, just because that value was tremendous. Where he was a projected 2nd round pick for the longest time. I feel like postseason. I think B plus I'm cool with. I'd lean maybe more towards B, but
we can do B.
I'd lean definitely in the B range. I think the ability to address all the positions of need was really good. I would love if this offense could be more explosive, though, man. If they were able to up the level of this offense around Ward, I think this offense could be really fun really quick. And so that's kind of what I'd be looking for. Hopefully DK and Iomanner contribute to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Well, rounding out the AFC South then, we gave Houston a D, which is generous if we're being honest. Indianapolis a C+, Jacksonville a C+, and Tennessee a B. So going through, we're done with the AFC. I think looking at it, the AFC East got the best, did the best out of the AFC divisions. We gave Buffalo an A-, Miami a C, but the Jets an A-, and New England an A. And worst is definitely the AFC South with Houston a D, Indianapolis and Jacksonville C+, and Tennessee a B. So next week we're going to pick it up with the NFC East and the NFC North, and then 2 weeks from now we'll round it out with the NFC West and the NFC South. So thank you all so much for watching, for tuning in, and enjoying this as we're going through. Let us know if we talked about your team today, how you felt about them. You know, what you felt like we got right, what you feel like, hey, no, you got this wrong, and even like, hey, the fan base is really high. You know, Titans fan base, we're really, really high on Jackson Slater. Like, okay, didn't know that. Good to know. You know, whatever it might be. So again, thank you all so much for watching and supporting us. And yeah, have a great week, everybody.